In a synthesizer, the sound starts with the oscillator, goes through the filter, and then reaches the amplifier. The amplifier is going to be changing all the time. In fact, we had many amplifying stages or gain stages throughout our mixing board and in all our effects. This one is a voltage-controlled amplifier, otherwise known as a VCA, and is designed to move all the time and quite rapidly. And there's always a specific modulator attached to the VCA. And the specific modulator is an envelope. We mentioned it briefly earlier, but an envelope is basically a set path that runs every time a key is pressed. And that path usually goes up, comes down, stays for a while, and then goes away at the end of the note. Now, we've used the term envelope before in the class when we were talking about a compressor, right? We had that listen side of the compressor, or the side chain or key side, that calculated an envelope, which was kind of an average over time of the amplitude of the sound going through it. If we were to refine our language a little bit, we would call the compressor's envelope an envelope follower, in that it's calculating the average over time. But then it controls the amplitude, and actually the volume part of that compressor is actually a VCA, a voltage-controlled amplifier. And that envelope follower, an amp, was creating a signal, or was creating a voltage that was controlling the VCA in the compressor, or the gate, or the limiter, or the expander. So we're seeing these idea of synthesis kind of connects the effects and the sound creators. It's kind of a neat thing that way. So the envelope in a synthesizer, instead of following and calculating the sound that's in something else, it creates a path. In fact, we define a path for it ahead of time, typically with 4 controls. ADSR. You may have seen that in a synthesizer before, or read it in a magazine somewhere. Those 4 letters stand for attack time, decay time, sustain level, and release time. And it's important to be using that terminology as you think about ADSR, because it can be a little difficult. We have another one of these examples where words mean different things in different contexts. And when talking about synthesis, attack is something very different than what we usually have. Like when I'm talking about a drum, if I would say it has more attack, I'd say it was sharper, right? It was louder at the beginning. But on a synthesizer, if I increase the attack time, it actually dulls the beginning of this note. So we want to be very careful with our terminology and know what's going on with that envelope. So again, it's attack time. And that what's going to happen is every time you hit a key, the envelope is going to run from 0 up to full value in the time of the attack time. So maybe that might be 5 milliseconds, maybe 10 milliseconds, maybe half a second. But the more you increase that attack time, the slower it's going to ramp up. The next thing I'd like to jump to is the S part of it, which is the sustain level. Now, all the other knobs are time in this envelope, but the sustain is a level. So another reason to remember attack time, decay time, sustain level, release time. And the sustain level represents kind of a steady state that the note stays at while it's being held. Now this is useful when trying to replicate, say, a violin sound. The note starts with a nice aggressive bow, and then it kind of rests at a steady sustaining state. And we set that kind of level with the sustain level knob. Now there can be some time to get from that full value down to the sustain level. That's our decay time. And then when we release a key, the sound has to reduce down to 0, and that is our release time. So again, there is always an envelope attached to the main amplifier. And that envelope controls how the volume of the amplifier changes over time. It's controlled by 4 parameters: attack time, decay time, sustain level, and release time. Attack time is the time it takes to get from 0 to full value when you press a key. Decay time is the time it takes to get from full value down to the sustain level. When you release the key, you enter the release phase, and the release time is the amount of time it takes to get from the sustain level down to 0. Let's look how this functions in our basic synthesizer. Again, we're going to move into a synthesizer, and I'd like you to locate the main amp envelope on your synthesizer. Now, envelopes are general purpose modulators, meaning you can have many envelopes, and they can be controlling many different things within your synthesizer. Very often, the last envelope in your synth will be your main amplitude envelope. Now, the synthesizer we have in front of us has a very nice display for how the envelope is functioning. On many synthesizers, you have to know what the envelope shape is just by seeing 4 knobs or faders labeled A, D, S, and R. So while some synths give you a nice visual of the amplifier envelope, many just give you those 4 faders and require you to know it. So let's see how ADSR works. On this patch, I have a sawtooth waveform that's being heavily filtered, and let's hear it. I'd like to point out something about this display. The yellow bar at the top is showing you my note on and note off. So when I play a MIDI note on, you'll see that yellow bar start, and when I release a note, you see that yellow bar stop. Right now, I have configured what I would consider an organ envelope. It functions like a switch, and it's just like an organ, like a Hammond organ does. You press the key, the note starts, you release the key, the note stops as fast as possible. And we configure that by putting our attack time at 0. Our decay time really doesn't matter, but we'll set it low, sustain level all the way up, and release time very low. Now, as we do this, we might run into an issue. Let's hear. You may find on some synthesizers that you get a slight click when you have attack and release set that fast. So you may find that just a little bit of attack time and a little bit of release time will help remove the click at the beginning and ending of notes. The next thing we might want to do with this patch is make it swell in. Now this is kind of an unusual type of envelope. There's not many natural sounds that do this, but this emulates reverse sounds quite well. If you take a cymbal sound and reverse it, you get a swelling in kind of character. And again, we can emulate that by increasing attack time. Let's increase attack time way up here and see what happens. So we see note on started here, the sound swelled in slowly, and when I release the key, it stops immediately because the release phase happened. Now I'd like to point out something right now. You'll notice when I played attack, the sound went up in a straight line. That's because this is a very simple synthesizer. But you find that those kind of details vary from synth developer to synth developer. You might find some synths where that's more of an exponential increase, some that's more of a logarithmic increase, but those little details of how the envelope actually functions really can make a big difference in the sound and does vary from developer to developer. So we said that increasing attack time is kind of unusual. Very often, that's set quite quickly. The next thing we might want to do is make the sound last when we release the key, and that's going to be by adjusting the release time. So if you open up a patch and it just stops way too quickly, maybe you have to increase release time. Or if you have a patch that tends to hang on after every note, reducing release time is often the best choice. Let's try it here. I'll increase release time, and again remember, the yellow bar at the top is the note on and note off. I'll play a key, the note starts, I release a key, and the sound gradually goes down to nothing. If I put a very high release time, release the note, and it decays away slowly. Again, the shape of that release can vary from developer to developer. So let's set up another patch. And the next kind of patch I'd like to look at is what I would call a percussive sound. So the sounds we've been developing now hold on while you're holding the note. We call those sustaining notes. So a sustaining synthesizer patch would be good at emulating things like strings or brass, things that can hold a note or add energy to their system as the note holds on. Real instruments that are blown or bowed will have a sustaining envelope because they're adding energy to that note as the note continues on. If I have a sound that's plucked or hit, then there's no energy being added over the course of the note, and we bring sustain level all the way to 0. Now, when sustain level is at 0, we're going to use decay time to control the length of the note. Let's try it out now. I'll hold a long note on my keyboard, and it just decays away. You can see from the yellow bar that I'm still holding onto the note, and I can release it. Nothing really changes. That's because the decay time controls the length of the note now, because sustain is at 0. So again, this kind of envelope is good for creating kind of plucky or hit sounds, because energy is added to that system once and is let to naturally decay. If I want to create kind of a sound that has a longer decay, I increase decay time. Now, what happens if I release the key during the decay phase? Let's see what happens. If I release the key in the middle of the decay phase, the release phase starts from that point. Let's try it with a little bit longer of a release time. we see we have the end of the note, and then the release time starts. So the release phase will start at the level that you release the key, no matter where that is. What we've actually created now is a damped percussive sound, kind of like a piano. On a piano, when you play a key, the key starts and it decays away naturally, right? You're not adding energy to the system. There wouldn't be a sustain level to it because the energy is decaying away. But when you release the key, the dampers on the keyboard come up and stop the note. So we've created a damped percussive sound. If we would like this to be a truly kind of percussive sound where the length of the note you're pressing doesn't really matter, usually you would set release time close to decay time. So they're set about the same. And this way, when you release the key, it changes a little bit, but it's pretty much the same. On some envelopes, you'll have a one-shot option, which makes it so it doesn't matter at all how long you hold a key. It's going to play that envelope straight through no matter what. And that's a great feature if your synthesizer envelope has it. The other kind of envelope we're going to be setting up very often is a sustaining envelope with a strong attack. And this happens on most sustaining instruments. If I'm blowing into a trumpet, there's a loud initial burst of air, and then it settles down into a sustaining state. Same thing if you're playing a bowed instrument. You're bowing a violin, there's a strong attack, and then it settles down into a sustaining state. If we want to create that sort of sound for bowing or blowing, we're going to be using all the phases of the envelope, and I'll set sustain level somewhere in the middle. In this case, we'll see the kind of standard diagram of an ADSR envelope, and we'll see that we have attack time is very low, and then it'll immediately decay down to the sustain level, stay there until I release my key, and then the release phase starts. Let's see. Stays there, I release the key, and it decays away. If I want that to be kind of a punchier sound, I can reduce the decay time, and I get a strong burst at the front, and then I release the key, I get release time. If I want it to go away quicker, I reduce release time. Now there's one more envelope I'd like to show you, and this is a kind of fun one. It's unusual. It's really, I've never used it in a real context. It's only happened to me by accident, but it points out a really interesting quirk of the amp envelope. In fact, I call it the quirk envelope. And we get this by setting sustain level all the way down, but release level very high, and decay level very short also. So we have no attack time, a short decay, but a long release. Now the strange thing about this is if I play a long note, we just get a short blip. But if I play very quickly on my keyboard, we get a long decay. Again, a long note, and we get a short blip, or if I play really quickly, we get a long decay. And that's happening because remember, the release phase starts right when you release the key, no matter where the envelope is. So in this instance, if I play a short note, I get a long result, and if I play a long note, I get a short result. Kind of a strange kind of envelope, and I learned it because it happened to me by accident. I'd like you to go to your DAW and try to work with the amp envelope. This is one of those really important features you're going to have to know because it's one of the best ways to take a patch that's almost perfect and make it perfect.